The Project Gutenberg ebook of Japanese color prints and their designers. This ebook is for the use of anyone anywhere in the United States and most other parts of the world at no cost and with almost no restrictions whatsoever. You may copy it, give it away or reuse it under the terms of the Project Gutenberg license included with this ebook or online at www.gutenberg.org. If you are not located in the United States, you will have to check the laws of the country where you are located before using this ebook. Title: Japanese Color Prints and Their Designers. Author: Frederick W. Gookin. Release date: May 25, 2013. Ebook number 42811. Language: English. Start of the Project Gutenberg ebook. Japanese Color Prints and Their Designers. Harunobu. Lovers Walking in Snow. Japanese Color Prints and Their Designers. A lecture delivered before the Japan Society of New York on April 19, 1911 by Frederick William Gookin. New York. The Japan Society. 1913. Contents: Japanese Color Prints and Their Designers. Catalog of a Lone Collection of Japanese Color Prints. Introduction. Catalog. Illustrations. Harunobu. Lovers Walking in Snow. Moronobu. Nobleman and Two Ladies at Seashore. Kiyomasu. Actors Boating Party. Masanobu. Geisha playing samisen. Toyonobu. Actor reading letter. Kiyomitsu. Daimyo Procession Game. Harunobu. Young Woman Before Tori. Harunobu. The Sleeping Elder Sister. Harunobu. The Sleeping Elder Sister. Harunobu. The Sleeping Elder Sister. Harunobu. Woman Reading Letter. Kuryusai. Musume Leaping from Temple Balcony. Shunsho. Woman in Red. Kiyonaga. Holiday Group at Gotenyama. Kiyonaga. Picnic Party. Bunko. Actor as woman talking to men. Kiyonaga. Man and two women approaching temple. Shunko. Women watching girls bouncing balls. Eshi. Fate in a Nobleman's Palace. Sheriku. Two actors. Yudamuro. Woman with a musical toy. Toyokuni. Women in bath house. Hokusai. Fuji from Ushibori. Hiroshige. Pines at Hamamatsu. Japanese Color Prints and Their Designers. PG-3 In the annals of art production, the color prints designed by the master artists of the Ukiyo school occupy a unique place. They represent a plebeian art which was not a spontaneous upgrowth from the soil, but, so to speak, a downgrowth or offshoot from an old and highly developed art of aristocratic lineage. This elder art had its fountainhead in ancient China. That country, during the Tang and the Sung dynasties, 618 to 905, 960-1280, was the seat of an aesthetic movement during which painting and other arts reached an extraordinarily high development. To the works produced during this great flowering time of art, the Japanese painters of the classical schools turned for inspiration and enlightenment. These works were distinguished by singleness of purpose, rhythmic vitality, and synthetic coherence, and by a clear conception of the essential that goes far beyond anything elsewhere attained, and which, when fully apprehended, must inevitably force a revision of Western ideas and criteria. The art of ancient China and of the earlier Japanese schools is an art refined, poetic, and intensive to the last degree. It is based upon profound understanding of aesthetic laws. The artists were carefully grounded in the fundamental principles that govern all art, whether Oriental or Occidental. The result of this training is apparent in the homogeneity of their works. In Europe, very confused notions have prevailed as to what should be done and what is permissible in art. Not even the great artists have always seen clearly. Had they done so, it cannot be doubted that Western achievement would have attained a much higher level than it has ever reached. In the Japanese modifications of the ancient Chinese art, its traditions, pg and aesthetic ideals were sedulously preserved. With only rare exceptions, the artists, and under this head it is necessary to include potters, lacquerers, metal workers, swordsmiths, and others, were drawn from the upper classes. Many of them were in the service of the daimyo, and did not sell their productions, but received from their noble patrons regular stipends in koku of rice. Seldom did any of their works find their way into the hands of the common people, who had little opportunity, therefore, to become familiar with them. Gradually, however, as the number of paintings, statues, and other art objects multiplied and the temples were filled with votive offerings, the classical art made its impress upon buildings, wearing apparel, and utensils of all sorts. Its conventions and principles were laid hold of by all classes and became the heritage of the entire people. Moronobu. Nobleman and two ladies at seashore. The social fabric in old Japan was one of sharp distinctions. At the upper end of the scale were the emperor, the kyuj, or court nobles, the daimyo, or lords of the 251 provinces, and the samurai, or hereditary military men, from whom were recruited the officials, priests, and scholars. Between these and the lower classes was an almost immeasurable gulf. Highest among the highmen, or commoners, were the farmers. Below them were the artisans, and still lower were the merchants, innkeepers, servants, and the like, while lowest of all were the eta, or outcasts, a class comprising scavengers, butchers, leather workers, and others engaged in what were considered degrading occupations. Under the peaceful regime of the Tokugawa shoguns there was a sociological change that in the cities almost amounted to a transformation. The most salient feature was the rise of the tradesmen and artisans to wealth and power. Many places of amusement sprang up, restaurants and tea houses multiplied, jugglers, storytellers, musicians, and other itinerant entertainers found audiences in every street. Fetes were frequently held in the temple compounds, the theater rose to a position of prominence, and the yukwaku, or courtesan quarters, with their medley of attractions, became established institutions. The art of the ukiyo was a direct outcome of the gay life of this time. The inception of the school dates back to the closing years of the pg 16th century, when a reaction set in against the Chinese classicism of the Ashikaga period. This manifested itself in the choice of Japanese instead of Chinese subjects, and in novel treatment in which features of both the classic Kano and Tosa styles were combined, but which in many respects broke away from academic traditions. The reputed leader of the revolt was Iwasashoi, better known as Matahei, son of the daimyo of Itami, but other distinguished artists, notably Kano Sanraku, also painted pictures in the new manner, which was not then held to constitute a distinct school. The subjects being drawn from the life of the people, these pictures were called ukiyo. Is the Japanese term for a picture or drawing. One ukiyo, as originally written, had a Buddhistic signification and was applied to the secular as distinguished from the ecclesiastical world. Literally the word means the miserable world, but as now used it may be more accurately translated as the passing, or floating, world of everyday life. Perhaps for the reason that ukiyo themes were not considered quite dignified, and because they did not express poetic ideas, the ukiyo paintings of Matahei and his contemporaries and successors, though prized and much sought after, were seldom signed, and the identification of their authorship is a matter of extreme difficulty. For more than half a century works in this manner continued to be produced in considerable numbers, but the movement did not crystallize into a school until, in the person of Hishikawa Moronobu, a leader appeared to give it form and direction. Moronobu was an artist of rare distinction. His paintings were eagerly sought by the daimyos and the wealthier samurai. But Moronobu was a man of the people, and it was as a designer of book illustrations and later of ichimaye, or single-sheet prints, that he gave the impetus to ukiyo. For 50 years or more prior to his time, books with engraved illustrations had been published in Japan, but they were comparatively few and the illustrations were poor and crudely executed. The 12 drawings Moronobu made for a book of instruction for women in etiquette and hygiene, published in 1659, marked a decided advance. This, so far as we know, PG6 was the first of a long series of books illustrated by him. Their popularity was deservedly great, and by them his fame became widespread. The illustrations were printed in black from blocks similar to those from which the text was printed, and were characterized by fine broad treatment and a rather wiry but strong and expressive outline. About 1670 Moronobu began to issue large single-sheet prints which could be affixed to screens or mounted as keikomono. These prints, which were impressions in black from one block only, are known as sumi-yesumi, being the Japanese name for Chinese or, as we incorrectly call it, India ink. They were designed to be colored by hand, and apparently a part of the edition was so colored before being placed on sale by the publishers. At first this coloring consisted of a few touches of yellow-green crudely laid on, later it became more elaborate, and occasionally we meet with prints that are very beautifully colored, but in such cases it is impossible to tell when or by whom the coloring was done. The probability is that in some instances it was the work of purchasers of the prints. Moronobu's pupils, of whom there were many, devoted themselves almost exclusively to painting. After his death in 1695, the production of prints fell chiefly into the hands of Tori Kiyonobu and his son Tori Kiyomasu, two artists who take rank among the most talented men of the ukiyo school. Moronobu had taken for the subjects of his prints historic incidents, the manners and customs of the people, and, in particular, women and their occupations and amusements. To these the Tori artists, seeing a new and fertile field for the print designer in the rise of the theater as a popular form of entertainment, added portraits of actors in the costumes of their most admired roles. Especially esteemed were Kiyonobu's portraits of the first Danjui Roi. During the Genroku period, 1688 to 1704, the people developed a passion for the theater that amounted to veritable madness. In the first quarter of the 18th century this reached a height that sorely troubled the Tokugawa rulers. To check it, various expedients, among them the exclusion of women from the stage, were tried. They only added fuel to the flame. Certain gross practices were abolished. This helped to purify the theater, but also to perpetuate it by removing the seeds PG7 of what must inevitably have meant its early decay. Actors of distinguished ability became popular idols. Their comings and goings were like royal progresses. Wherever they went, were it to view the cherry blossoms at Ueno, for a boating party on the river, or for a visit to the Yoshiwara, they moved in state. Yet their rank in the social scale was so low that they were looked upon as little better than eta. The earliest actors were contemptuously termed kawaramano, riverbed folk, from the fact that the first theatrical performances in Japan were upon a stage erected in the dry bed of the Kamogawa at Kyoto. The stigma that attached to their origin and to the vulgarity of the early performances has never been entirely lifted. Many of the ukiyo artists felt it a degradation to make drawings of actors. Nevertheless, the popular demand created a supply, and for more than a century a large proportion of the enormous output of prints consisted of theatrical scenes and portraits of the performers. Kiyomasu. Actors' boating party. Many of the prints produced during the early years of the 18th century were large single figures of actors, geishas, and women of the Yoshiwara. These were broadly treated, with strong, free brush strokes based upon the technique of the Kano masters and quite different from Moronobu's style, which was more nearly like that of the Tosa painters. Each of the classical schools, I may explain, had its own peculiar methods, for which brushes of special shape were required. In their spontaneity, their freedom, their glorious sweep of line, these prints are among the finest works of the ukiyo school. Among them are many masterpieces of linear composition. Yet by the people of the upper classes they were regarded as hopelessly vulgar. Though the Kano painters used similar sweeping strokes, they laid great stress upon carefully modulated tone. The noten, or lightness and darkness of the ink in different parts of the drawing, was an essential quality. It should not be confused with chiaroscuro, the science of light and shade. Noten signifies merely difference in lightness and darkness of tone. In the early prints this did not appear. All the lines were uniformly black. And the addition of coloring which was looked upon as coarse and gaudy was a further offense to persons of refined taste. Pg 8. Our vision not being hampered by the canons of the Kano Academy, we can appreciate the distinguished character of these compositions. Unquestionably the brushwork of a Sesshu, a Motonobu, or a Tanyu, to name a few only of the most eminent of the Japanese painters, has a precious quality not to be found in any printed line. Point 2. Nevertheless the primitive ukiyo prints have a freshness and vital force peculiarly their own. The word primitive as applied to these prints calls for a word of explanation. They are primitive, not in their art, which is highly developed, but merely as regards its application to wood engraving. The failure of Japanese connoisseurs to appreciate ukiyo art is not, however, entirely or even principally because of its technique. The art of the classical schools is deeply imbued with poetic feeling and usually is dignified in subject. Ukiyo art, on the contrary, is flippant, whimsical, comic. Except when it deals with portraits, landscapes, or birds and flowers, subjects that are not strictly ukiyo, it is seldom that the things depicted are intended to be taken quite seriously. In nearly every picture there is some joke, open or cleverly hidden, some amusing fantasy in the shape of a modern analogue or travesty of popular myth, well-known tale, or historical event. Sly hits at the vices or follies of the aristocrats are not uncommon. A very large proportion of the subjects deals with the theater and the denizens of the Yoshiwara. To the Japanese of the upper classes, ukiyo art was a synonym for the art of the underworld. It is not surprising that they failed to appreciate its merit. To give ukiyo paintings or prints an honorable place in one's house was a confession of lack of taste. Were there no other reason, the subjects for the most part rendered them unfit, if not impossible. The prints were indeed amusing, and therefore many of them were saved, but they were looked upon much as we regard the pictures in our comic periodicals. Even when the art in these is good, it is hard to disassociate it from the humor and to enjoy it for itself alone. More commonly we fail to appreciate it as art or even to think of it as such. So it was with the prints. To the Japanese they Pg9 appeared little better than children's toys. In considering this we should not overlook the important circumstance that when first printed they were in general less charming than they are today. The wonderful color that makes them so entrancing has come in large measure through the mellowing influence of time. Not infrequently this has wrought transformations that would seem incredible did not close studies show clearly the changes that have taken place. Masanobu. Geisha playing samisen. Even today inherited prejudice prevents widespread appreciation of the prints in the land of their origin. Our enthusiastic admiration is still more or less a mystery to our neighbors across the Pacific. Only now, when most of the fine prints have passed into the hands of European and American collectors, are the Japanese connoisseurs beginning to understand how it is that the Western art lover, unfettered by any traditional point of view and not disturbed by any meanings the subject may hold or suggest, is able to perceive the glorious color, the superb composition, the masterly treatment and rare beauty to which they have been blind. The history of art is everywhere among civilized peoples a record of the influence of a succession of ideas, each in turn dominating for a longer or a shorter period the character of what is produced. When an idea has sufficient vitality to constitute the germ of a specific type of art, and artists of creative genius are inspired by it, the votaries working under the stimulus of a common ideal form what we designate as a school. When left to pursue its course of development unchecked, each marked type of art, as John Addington Symonds pointed out in one of his essays, passes through stages corresponding to the embryonic, the adolescent, the matured, the decadent, and the exhausted. This sequence, he showed, was clearly marked in the evolution of Italian painting, the Attic and the Elizabethan drama. Any of the classic schools of Japanese painting, the Koze, the Yamato, the Sesshu, or the Kano, would furnish an excellent illustration, though in studying these movements it would be necessary to follow them back to their Chinese antecedents. The Ukiyo school affords a particularly striking example. In the works of the earlier artists Moronobu, Kiyonobu, Kiyomasu, and the Kwagetsyudoi group we find pg-10 superabundant vigor, swift inspiration, and splendid though sometimes brutal force. The note of prophecy that these works contain is found also in those of the next generation of artists, foremost among whom was Okumura Masanobu. The fire of enthusiasm still glows brightly, but more attention is paid to subtleties of style, to beauty of detail, and to the development of technical processes. Hand-colored prints are superseded by those in which the color as well as the black outline is printed. Ukiyo has become an art of the printed pictures which in large measure have taken the place of paintings. Then, after a brief interval of eager experiment and rapid changes, comes the flowering time, when a group of great artists turn out by the thousand works in which spiritual intensity is combined with grace, beauty, refinement of composition, and technical perfection. This is the epoch of Harunobu, Shunshoi, Shigemasa, Kuryusai, Kiyonaga, and Shunkoi. The decline of the initial impetus that brought the school into being is plainly apparent in the works of the next generation. Utamaro was an artist of the very first rank, whose genius cannot be gainsaid. Eshi and Toyokuni were only a little less brilliant, but it was their misfortune to come upon the scene when the cycle of animating ideas had been exhausted. Too virile to be content merely to echo the performances of their predecessors, they spent their energy in inventing variations upon the perfected type. It was the only course open to them, but it led steadily and swiftly downward, though neither the artists nor the people who gleefully applauded each successive innovation were conscious of the decadence. With the appearance of still another generation of artists upon the scene, the degradation of the school was complete. Artistic feeling was obscured by blatant vulgarity and affectation. There was a steady letting down to the level of the popular taste, which was steadily lowered in consequence. The skill of the more able artists was expended in the production of works interesting chiefly as tours de force, more remarkable for technical than for artistic merit. The tendency toward exaggerated drawing became more pronounced, coloring grew more crude, raw, and overvivid. Coincident with this decline in the art of PG-11, the popular school was a change for the worse in the fashions of the time. Loud patterns for brocades and other fabrics came into vogue, garments became showy and elaborate, coiffures, more especially those of the demi-monde, were often startling in their extravagance. As the prints were accurate mirrors of contemporary life, in these changed fashions may be found a partial explanation of the inferiority of the works of the later men. The Ukiyo-ryōi was a school of design which laid its impress upon all of the arts. The prints were but one of its phases, though the principal and the most distinguished of them. The rise, culmination, and disintegration took place all along the line. Toward the middle of the 19th century the Ukiyo school sank into the dotage of decrepitude, and then into the sleep from which there is no awakening. I choose this phrase deliberately. An art that is of the past can never be revived. We may strive to work in the style of Harunobu or of Kiyonaga. All we can do is to copy their forms and imitate their mannerisms. We cannot possibly get our inspiration from the same source as they, that dried up at the fountainhead long ago. The best work we can do in their style must necessarily lack creative force and be without a spark of real vitality. Primarily the charm of the ukiyo color prints is due to the fact that the leading masters of the school were artists of exceptional power. It is also due to the fact that most of them three made print designing their chief occupation, to which they devoted their thought, time, and skill, and that with rare exceptions they were less distinguished as painters. Toyonobu. Actor reading letter from about 1670, when Moronobu began to issue single-sheet prints, until about 1742, a period of at least 70 years, the prints were in black outline and were colored by hand. They were, in fact, cheap paintings. Early in the 18th century the chief pigment used in coloring them was red lead. The Japanese name for this pigment is tan, and the prints upon which it appears are designated as tanye. About 1710 yellow and citron were commonly used with the tan. 4 or 5 years later a new style of hand coloring, said to have been PG-12 devised by Tori Kiyonobu, came into vogue and greatly modified the style in which the prints were designed. In place of tan he substituted beni, a very beautiful but fugitive red extracted from the saffron. This was used in combination with a greenish yellow, probably gamboge, and low-toned blues and purples. Finer details were introduced into the designs, and the coloring in general was more carefully done. In response to a growing demand for less expensive pieces, smaller prints, hosoye, became common. To give brilliance to the pigments a little thin lacquer, urushi, was mixed with them, and, while wet, parts of the design were sprinkled with metallic powder, which was probably applied by blowing it through a small bamboo tube. These prints were known as urushiye, or lacquer prints. A little later the custom grew up of painting parts of the prints with black lacquer. Not until the year 1742 did the practice begin of applying color by impressions from flat wood blocks. Why the invention should have been so long delayed, and why, after it was once made, nearly 14 years more should have elapsed before the number of color blocks was increased beyond 2, are questions to which no certain answer is yet forthcoming. It is incredible that during the 40 years when innumerable hand-colored prints were issued no one should have conceived the idea of printing the color as well as the black outline. Without doubt some practical difficulty connected with the printing stood in the way. Possibly the thing that awaited discovery was the trick of mixing rice paste with the color to keep it from running. Or, as is more likely, it took a long while to discover a practical method of securing accurate register in impressions made upon damp paper which was liable to stretch or shrink during the printing process. Whatever the problem may have been, the honor of the solution is due to Okumura Masanobu. Being a publisher as well as an artist, he was no doubt alive to the economic advantage of a cheaper process and to the attraction of novelty. Some years earlier he had invented the hashiraye, or pillar print, and had also put forth a series of prints that show a fair understanding of the laws of linear perspective, to which he gave the name of ukiyo. Being an artist as well as a publisher, Masanobu perceived that the change in process called for a change in the PG-13 style of the designs. The very first of the new prints, therefore, were characterized by finer and more exquisite detail than was suitable for the hand-colored editions. The colors used were beni and a soft green, and the name beni-ye, which had been applied to the hand-colored prints in which beni was used, was also given to them. A happier selection of colors could not have been made. By thinning the red and modifying the hue of the green a wide range of effects was secured. Almost every possible combination and variation was tried during the 14 or 15 years that the beni-ye were in vogue. The world is far richer because of this long period before the number of color blocks was increased, since time was afforded to work out the decorative possibilities resulting from the limitation to two colors and black and white. This limitation demanded fine skill and creative resource in the invention of pattern and the distribution of the colors employed. 4 The results achieved were remarkable. Until one has seen them, it is impossible to realize that so much life and vivacity of coloring could be given by impressions from two blocks charged with rose and green. Kiyomitsu Daimyo Procession Game. By many the beni-ye are regarded as the choicest products of the school. So charming were they when first printed that they speedily drove the urushi-ye prints out of the market, with the exception of the tall hashira-ye, or pillar prints, of which hand-colored editions continued to be produced for a year or two, to satisfy those who still wished paintings rather than prints. Most of the beni-ye that have survived until our time are very much faded. The beni has quite generally turned into a soft yellow or disappeared altogether. The green is more stable, but that also has in many instances become a warm citron or russet. Extremely rare are the specimens in which the original color has not suffered material modification. From the testimony of the prints themselves, it appears probable that very soon after Okumura Masanobu issued the first prints in beni and green, similar prints were put forth by Nishimura Shijinaga, Ishikawa PG-14 Toyonobu, Tori Shiro, otherwise Kiyonobu II, and all the Edo print designers, among them the veteran Tori Kiyomasu. None of these men seems to have attempted any marked departure from the type established by Okumura. About 1755, however, a group of young men appeared upon the scene, who were fired with zeal for further experiments. The leaders were Tori Kiyomitsu, Kentao Shigemasa, and Suzuki Harunobu. Kiyomitsu began by trying novel color schemes such as two tones of beni instead of beni and green. Then he tried a third color block. After this, new developments followed in rapid succession. The variety and range of the color schemes broadened almost from day to day. At first the wider resources proved an embarrassment, but the mastery attained in dealing with the simpler means soon enabled the artists to take advantage of them. Invention was stimulated. In 1764 a printer named Kinroku discovered a method by which printing in colors from many blocks became possible. We can only guess at the nature of the difficulty that was surmounted, but as it is known that the printing was usually done upon dampened paper, it is evident that the stretching or shrinking of the sheets, to which I have already referred, must have proved extremely troublesome, and that every additional block must have multiplied the liability to defective register. It is reasonably safe to assume, therefore, that to find some means of overcoming this was the problem which remained unsolved for so many years. Harunobu. Young woman before Tori. The name of Suzuki Harunobu is familiar to every admirer of Japanese prints. It is in large measure to his genius that the development of full-color printing is due. He was not only the first artist to make use of the new process, but he took advantage of it to bring out prints of a novel type. Very dainty and graceful these were, and in the poetic allusions or quiet humor with which they were charged, and in the quality of the brush strokes with which the drawings were executed, they made a direct appeal to men of taste. Success was instantaneous. By the year 1765 Harunobu had come to the front and distanced all competitors for popular favor. The serenity and compelling charm of his compositions brought him wide fame. Realizing the possibilities that now lay before him, he proudly exclaimed, "Why should I degrade PG-15 myself by the delineation of actors?" His ambition, he said, was to become the true successor of the painters in the department of printing, that is to say, to design prints that should be worthy substitutes for paintings. Instead of restricting himself to a few primary or secondary hues and the variations resulting from their superposition, He mixed his colors to get the precise tint desired, and he used as many color blocks as were needed for the effects at which he aimed. The Yedo, or Yedo pictures, as the prints had been called from the fact that they were produced only at the eastern capital, were now denominated Nishiki, or brocade pictures, from the number of colors woven together in them. To the printing itself, the charging of the blocks with color, the character and quality of the pigments and of the paper used, Harunobu gave careful attention, and these things were greatly improved as a result of his experiments. Under his leadership the art now entered upon the period of its greatest triumphs. In the eager search for novel subjects scarcely anything was left untouched. History, mythology, and romance, the numberless fates and merry-makings of the people and the daily routine of their lives, representations of celebrated poets and heroes, scenes from the drama, portraits of popular actors and courtesans, the revels of the Yoshiwara, animals and plants, familiar scenes and famous landscapes, furnished motives for almost endless broadsheets and book illustrations. No other art was ever more crowded with human interest. The forward movement in print designing at this epoch was helped on by a number of highly gifted artists who seem to have worked together to some extent. Katsukawa Shunshoi, who took up the theatrical branch of print designing that Harunobu scorned, is one of the most distinguished masters of the ukiyo school. He was a designer of marked power, a colorist of the first rank. His works are not yet appreciated as they should be, but the finest of them yield pure aesthetic delight of most exalted quality. Kintao Sujimasa, Ipatsusai Bunkoi, and Isoda Kuryusai also rank among the first-rate men of this period. In the contest for popular favor during the 10 years following the death of Harunobu, which took place in the summer of 1770, it has been said that the guerdon rested upon Kuryusai, but that is a mistake. PG 16 for both Shunshoi and Shijimasa stood higher in the estimation of qualified judges. All, however, were surpassed a few years later by Kiyonaga, the last great artist of the Tori line and the culminating figure in the history of the popular school. He conquered by the rugged strength and marvelous quality of his brush strokes, by the richness of his coloring and the ripe mastery he displayed over all the resources of his craft. But also he created a new type of design that which found expression in the great diptychs and triptychs that stand as the triumphs of color printing. At the height of his power his influence over his contemporaries was so great that, without exception, the younger men among them copied his style as closely as they could. When Kiyonaga, about 1793, stopped designing prints, the decadence had already set in. The decade that followed was a period of rapid deterioration, with Yodomuro as its particular evil genius. Yet many of the most splendid of the prints were produced in that decade. Where shall we look for anything finer than Eshi's wonderful series with the chocolate background, or his triptychs of the Prince Genji series? Where shall we find anything to equal the brilliant characterization of Shiriku's actor portraits? Where else shall we turn for such marvelously facile rhythmic line, such swift, vital handling as that which made Yodomuro's masterpieces the despair of his many imitators? Toyokuni also designed many fine prints, but as he was a man of less force than the others I have named, he fell faster and farther than they did, and fewer of his works command our admiration. Harunobu, the sleeping elder sister. I have left myself little time to speak of two eminent artists, both of them world-renowned, who by their genius made the latter years of the ukiyo school as notable in their way as any in its entire history. Either Hokusai or Hiroshige might well engage our attention for an entire evening. Both were extraordinarily prolific. Hokusai was the more versatile and has the wider reputation. Both are among the greatest landscape artists the world has ever known. Their numerous prints of landscapes are a revelation of the possibilities of originality in composition and variety of interest in this field. Unless one has studied these prints in fine examples, it is impossible to realize how great is their PG-17 merit. This is true of all the prints, but particularly true of Hiroshige's. Between the best impressions and the very good ones the difference is really astonishing. But the best are so extremely rare as to make it probable that because of the difficulty and the cost of printing, very few of them were issued, the publishers finding cheaper editions more profitable. Though classed as ukiyo artists, Hokusai and Hiroshige really represent a separate movement which undoubtedly would have crystallized into a distinct school had worthy followers arisen to carry it forward, had the times been different, and, last but not least, had the genius of the two masters been less transcendent. In this sketch of the history of the art of ukiyo color printing only the more salient features have been touched upon. Of the prints themselves it is not too much to say that the finest of them are the most beautiful specimens of printing that have been done in any land at any time. Yet none but the most primitive methods, or what from our point of view may seem such, were employed. The most wonderful among all the prints is but a rubbing or impression taken by hand from wood blocks. The artist having drawn the design with the point of a brush in outline upon thin paper, it was handed over to the engraver, who began his part of the work by pasting the design face downward upon a flat block of wood, usually cherry, sawn plankwise as in the case of the blocks used by European wood engravers in the time of Dürer. The paper was then scraped at the back until the design showed through distinctly in every part. Next, the wood was carefully cut away, leaving the lines in relief, care being taken to preserve faithfully every feature of the brush strokes with which the drawing was executed. A number of impressions were then taken in Chinese ink from this key block and handed to the artist to fill in with color. This ingenious plan, which is manifestly an outgrowth of the early custom of coloring the ink prints, sumiye, by hand, and which perhaps would never have been thought of had not the color itself been an afterthought, enabled the artist to try many experiments in color arrangement with a minimum amount of labor. The color scheme and ornamentation of the surfaces having been determined, the PG-18 engraver made as many subsidiary blocks 5 as were required, the parts meant to take the color being left raised and the rest cut away. Accurate register was secured by the simplest of devices. A right-angled mark engraved at the lower right-hand corner of the original block, and a straight mark in exact line with its lower arm at the left, were repeated upon each subsequent block, and, in printing, the sheets were laid down so that their lower and right-hand edges corresponded with the marks so made. The defective register which may be observed in many prints was sometimes caused by unequal shrinking or swelling of the blocks. In consequence of this, late impressions are often inferior to the early ones, even though printed with the same care, and from blocks that had worn very little. The alignment will usually be found to be exact upon one side of the print, but to get further out of register as the other side is approached. The printing was done on moist paper with Chinese ink and color applied to the blocks with flat brushes. A little rice paste was usually mixed with the pigments to keep them from running and to increase their brightness. Sometimes dry rice flour was dusted over the blocks after they were charged. To this method of charging the blocks much of the beauty of the result may be attributed. The color could be modified, graded, or changed at will, the blocks covered entirely or partially. Hard, mechanical accuracy was avoided. Impressions differed even when the printer's aim was uniformity. Sometimes, in inking the key block, which was usually the last impressed, some of the lines would fail to receive the pigment, or would be overcharged. This was especially liable to happen when the blocks were worn and the edges of the lines became rounded. A little more or a little less pigment sometimes made a decided difference in the tone of the print, and, it may be noted, has not infrequently determined the nature and the extent of the discoloration wrought by time. Harunobu, the sleeping elder sister. In printing, a sheet of paper was laid upon the block and the printer rubbed off the impression, using for the purpose a kind of pad called PG-19 a baron. This was applied to the back of the paper and manipulated with a circular movement of the hand. By varying the dampness of the paper and the degree of pressure, the color could be forced deep into the paper, or left upon the outer fibers only, so that the whiteness of those below the surface would shine through, giving the peculiar effect of light which is seen at its best in some of the Surimano prints designed for distribution at New Year's or other particular occasions, by Hokusai and his contemporaries. Uninked blocks were used for embossing portions of the designs. The skill of the printer was a large factor in producing the best results. Even the brilliancy of the color resulted largely from his manipulation of the pigments and various little tricks in their application. The first impressions were not the best, some 40 or 50 having to be pulled before the block would take the color properly. Many kinds of paper were used. For the best of the old prints it was thick, spongy in texture, and of an almost ivory tone. The finest specimens were printed under the direct personal supervision of the artists who designed them. Every detail was looked after with the utmost care. No pains were spared in mixing the tints, in charging the blocks, in laying on the paper so as to get the best possible impressions. Experiments were often tried by varying the color schemes. Prints of important series, as, for example, Hokusai's famous 36 views of Fuji, are met with in widely divergent colorings. The pigments most frequently used were comparatively few, and different lots of the same pigment seem to have been far from uniform in hue. As to this and some other points upon which we should be glad to have light, no very certain information exists. We do not know how soon some of the colors began to fade. Internal evidence indicates that in some instances the change took place within a comparatively short time, as in the case of the lovely blue used by Harunobu and Shunshoi chiefly as a color for sky and water. It appears to have been a compound tint formed of blue mixed with some other color to modify its intensity. In the change which followed, possibly a chemical one, the blue disappeared in whole or in part, leaving in its stead a buff hue having peculiar depth and a soft, velvety texture. To our PG-20 eyes the modified color is often far more beautiful than the original, but the variation, it may safely be asserted, was not desired by the artist. The quality of the color wrought by these changes explains why it is not possible today to reproduce the prints successfully. The printing process is still in use, and, as the plates in such publications as Koka attest, very splendid results are still yielded by it. But some of the old pigments cannot now be obtained, and if they could be, we should still have to wait long years for time to mellow the prints made with them. Indigo can be had, but it is not the same indigo and its color is not quite like the old, which was extracted from blue cloth imported from China. Beni can be made, but the secret of the blue added to it to produce the divine violet seen in many of the prints has been lost, as has that of the precious moss green used by Utamaro. Many reproductions have been made during the last 25 years, and some of them are extremely clever, but the printing lacks depth, and when placed beside the old works they appear dull and lifeless. Color prints were made for many purposes. To some extent they were used as advertisements. Incidentally they served as fashion plates. Some were regularly published and sold in shops. Others were designed expressly upon orders from patrons, to whom the entire edition, sometimes a very small one, was delivered. The number struck from any block, or set of blocks, varied widely. Of the more popular prints many editions were printed, each one, as might be expected, inferior to those that preceded it. Not infrequently the Yedo publishers removed from their out-of-date blocks the marks showing their imprint, and sold them to publishers in Osaka and Nagoya, by whom poor and cheap editions were issued. Irakuya of Nagoya, in particular, is said to have bought many old blocks, some of which were revamped in various ways before being reprinted. Harunobu, the sleeping elder sister. In a number of instances, when blocks had worn out or had been accidentally destroyed in the fires by which Yedo was ravaged, the artists were called upon to make new drawings of the same subjects. Usually, in such cases, the second design differed very little from the first, save in such details as the patterns upon the garments of the PG-21 figures and the styles of hair arrangement, which invariably reflected the current mode. Kiyonaga's Iris Garden and his well-known triptych Ushiwaka Serenading Jorurai are notable examples of this practice. 2 designs of each of these were issued, the intervals between the appearance of the first and second being, in each instance, about 3 or 4 years. For the later editions of many of the prints designed by Harunobu, changes were made in the blocks, and the number was sometimes increased and sometimes decreased. After his death, re-engravings of a number of his prints appear to have been made, as well as forged works in imitation of his style to which his name was attached. Most of the prints were sold at the time of publication for a few sen. The finer ones brought relatively higher prices, and such prints as the great triptychs and still larger compositions by Kiyonaga, Eshi, Toyokuni, Yudamuro, and other leading artists could never have been very cheap. In general, however, the price was small and they were regarded as ephemeral things. Many were used to ornament the small screens that served to protect kitchen fires from the wind, and in this use were inevitably soiled and browned by smoke. Others, made into kakemono or mounted upon the sliding partitions of the houses, perished in the fires by which Japanese cities have been devastated, or, if in houses that chanced safely to run the gauntlet of fires, typhoons, cloudbursts, and other mishaps, their colors faded and their surfaces were rubbed until little more than dim outlines were left. These lost prints include a very large proportion of those that were most beautiful, and especially of those having inoffensive subjects. Fortunately, though the upper classes did not consider the prints as works of art, that did not prevent them from buying them for the entertainment they afforded. The samurai, though they considered it degrading to take part in the amusements of the lower classes and affected to despise the vulgarity of the theater, sometimes attended the performances in disguise. And when they returned to their home provinces with their feudal lords after the 6 months of every year spent in the capital, they usually carried with them large quantities of prints. Country people visiting Yedo rarely returned without taking PG-22 many of these cheap souvenirs of the city to distribute among their neighbors. Of course many were destroyed, but the Japanese have always been accustomed to take care of their possessions, and so many thousands of prints were neatly packed away in boxes and placed in the karas, or fireproof storehouses. There they were often spoiled by mildew, the dread foe of the Japanese housewife, and eaten by insects. Those pasted in albums, as were many of the noted series by Hokusai and Hiroshige, fared better than the loose ones. Harunobu. Woman reading letter. Thus it has come about that in spite of the enormous number printed, really choice specimens are very rare. Of many of the most important, only 2 or 3 copies in good condition are known. Even at the time of their issue, the number of those in what may be called the proof state could not have been large. The best printing, as has already been pointed out, was not only difficult and relatively expensive, perhaps prohibitively expensive in many instances except for a small number of impressions, but when the blocks had worn so that the edges of the finest lines had lost their sharpness, it was quite impossible. Collections of prints were rarely made. Literary men often saved such as were inscribed with odes of especial merit, or had recondite meanings that appealed to them, and to their care we are indebted for the preservation of the majority of those that have survived in perfect or nearly perfect condition. For those who have learned the elements of their language, the charm of the prints is very great. I should perhaps say the charm of some of the prints is very great, for, as we learn what we ought to admire, we learn to discriminate, at first between the works of the different artists, then between different works by the same artist, and finally between different copies of the same work. The truth is that the prints are only in a remote sense to be spoken of as reproductions. Each impression is more or less an individual work of art. The difference in quality between one and another is often astonishingly wide. In conclusion, it may be well to specify briefly some of the qualities in the prints that appeal to people of taste. In the first place, there is the compelling charm of color. Equally notable are excellence of composition, grace, beauty, and sweep of line, distinctive character, PG-23 daringness of conception, and perfect balance of both line and mass. Collectively, the prints furnish the clearest exemplification of the basic principles of design that the world has to offer. Nowhere else can we find so much accomplished with simple means. Technically, also, they fulfill every requirement. Considered merely as wood engravings, they are of the first order of excellence. Though the drawing is seldom scientifically accurate, it is, nevertheless, of exquisite refinement and subtlety. In short, the best prints are creative works of very high order which amply justify our admiration because of their intrinsic merit. PG-24 Kuryusai. Musume leaping from temple balcony. PG-25 Catalogue of a lone collection of Japanese color prints. The Japan Society of New York, 5th Avenue Building. April 19 to May 19, 1911. PG-26 PG-27 Introduction. The leading masters of the Ukiyo school were a group of very great artists. The names of Kiyonaga, Harunobu, Okumura, Masanobu, Utamaro, Hokusai, and Hiroshige belong in the category of those whose fame is worldwide. Shuncho. Woman in Red. The finest of the color prints designed by these men and their fellow artists are masterpieces of rare distinction. This does not mean that all of their works should be so classed. The method by which the prints were produced enabled the artists to turn them out rapidly, and many were made that were trivial in character. They served almost as many purposes in their time as engravings, etchings, lithographs, and the photographic process reproductions do with us today. Naturally, they varied widely in merit and in quality. Many have been preserved, but the important prints by the greater artists are unfortunately very rare. Few of them have survived the vicissitudes of time, and fewer still in good condition. The inception of the Ukiyo school dates back to the early years of the 17th century, when a painter named Iwasa Matahei, departing from the traditional subjects of the painters of the classic schools, made pictures of dancing girls and scenes of everyday life. The first prints were made about 1660 by Hishikawa Moronobu and were in simple black outline. They were sometimes colored by hand with a few touches of color roughly laid on, probably by the publisher's assistants. In the early years of the 17th century, a style of coloring known as tanye, from the predominant use of a red lead pigment known as tan, came into vogue. A little later, prints were sold with more elaborate hand coloring. Lacquer was mixed with the pigments to give them brilliancy, and the prints were known as urushiye, or lacquer prints. In or about the year 1742, Okumura Masanobu began PG-28 to make the first true color prints. For these he used only two colors, green and a soft red called beni, and the prints were known as beni-ye. For some years, difficulties connected with the printing prevented the use of more than two color blocks, and not until 1764 was a method discovered which made it possible to use as many blocks as might be required. Suzuki Harunobu was the first artist to take advantage of the discovery. The prints designed by him during the next 6 years are among the finest works of the school. Under his guidance and that of Katsukawa Shuncho, the art of color printing was brought to perfection. Then followed a period when many prints of precious quality were produced. The culmination was reached during the 1780s, when Tori Kiyonaga turned out his marvelous single sheets, diptychs, and triptychs. Many splendid prints were designed in the next decade. It was then that Eshi made his delightful triptychs, that Sheriku stirred the people of Yedo with his wonderful caricature portraits of popular actors, and that Yotamuro gained wide fame by the products of his facile brush. It was, however, a period of decadence, and by the end of the century a considerable distance had been traveled upon the downward path. The prints made in the 19th century were, for the most part, coarse and gaudy, the chief exceptions being those designed by Hokusai and Hiroshige. These men, though classed as of the Ukiyo school, in reality represent what may more properly be termed another movement growing out of, but distinct from, the Ukiyo art that reached its apogee under Kiyonaga. While the present exhibition includes specimens of most of the different kinds of prints, some of them, more especially the earlier ones, of extreme rarity, historical completeness has not been attempted. The aim has been rather to show such prints of exceptional quality and beauty as are available in New York. Frederick W. Gookin, pg 29, pg 30, pg 31 Catalog. Hishikawa Moronobu, who was born probably in 1625 and died in 1695, was the first important Japanese artist to design prints. As a painter he is highly renowned. He illustrated many books and made a considerable number of single-sheet prints, which were all either in plain black or colored by hand. His works are now very rare. 6 lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. 1 large sumi-ye, ink print. Matsukaze Murasame, a nobleman and 2 ladies at the seashore watching 2 women dipping salt water in buckets. 2 sumi-ye, a man and a woman seated on the floor of a room. 3 sumi-ye, woman reading from a book to a man reclining on the floor by her side. Near them a maidservant and utensils containing refreshments. Lent by a collector. 4 sumi-ye, seen in the Yoshiwara. Tori Kiyonobu, founder of the Tori line and one of the leading artists of the Ukiyo school. Inventor of the tan-ye, or prints colored by hand with red lead, Japanese tan. He was born in 1664 and died on August 22, 1729. His style of drawing was characterized by great boldness and vigor. Lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. 5 large tan-ye. The actor Dekijima Hanya as a woman seated upon a sakura tree in bloom. 6 small tan-ye. The actor Ikushima Daikichi as a woman holding 2 small dogs. 7 small tan-ye. The actor Kamimura Kichisaburo as a dancing girl. 8 large hand-colored print. The actor Ikushima Daikichi as an Waran on parade, followed by Oitani Hiroji as a servant holding an umbrella over her. 9 tall hand-colored print. The actor Bando Hakozaburo. Lent by Samuel Isham. 10 urushi-ye. Ichikawa Monasuke as a strolling player carrying a monkey on his back. Lent by Howard Mansfield. 11 urushi-ye. The elopement of Yeya Hanbei and Oshia. Lent by a collector. 12 urushi-ye. A dancing girl. Tori Kiyomasu, eldest son of Kiyonobu, whom he succeeded as the head of the Tori line. His work closely resembles that of his father. He was born about 1685 and died on January 2, 1764. Lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. Kiyonaga. Holiday group at Gotanyama. 13 large sumi-ye. An actor's boating party on the Sumidagawa. 14 large tan-ye. The actors Yoshizawa Ayam and Kanto Koraku. 15 large tan-ye. The actors Kanto Koraku and Ikushima Daikichi. 16 large beni-ye. Ichikawa Danjui Roi as an enraged warrior. 17 beni-ye. One Okikugurawi in a female role. 18 beni-ye. Scene from a drama. The actors Tomizawa Saijiroi, on horseback, Oitani Hiroji, and Sigawa Kikuno Hoi. The beni has turned to a low-toned yellow. 19 Urushi Ye. Scene from a drama. Oitani Oneji, on horseback, threatening San Ogawa Ichimatsu in the role of a woman who has seized his bridle rein. 20 Beni Ye. Scene from a drama. Sawamura Sojui Roi as Sasaki no Saburoi and Nakamura Tomijui Roi as Meigo no Koraku. Furuyama Moromasa pupil, and perhaps the son, of Moronobu. He devoted himself chiefly to painting, but designed a few prints, most of which are yuki-yi, or perspective pictures, in the style of Okumura Masanobu. Lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased 21 large hand-colored yuki-yi, or perspective print. A game of ken in a room in a nobleman's house. Okumura Masanobu, one of the most eminent of the ukiyo artists. His drawings were greatly admired for their rare combination of force and refinement, and he exercised wide influence over his contemporaries and successors to the end of the 18th century. He was the first artist to use blocks from which prints were colored in flat tints. These were printed in the red known as beni, green, and black, and were known as beni-ye. He was also the first artist to make the tall, narrow pillar prints, hashira-ye, and was the inventor of the perspective prints which he called yuki-yi. His true name was Okumura Genpeki, and he was commonly known as Honya, bookseller, Genpeki, from the fact that he was the proprietor of a wholesale and retail book and print shop at the sign of the Red Gourd in Toraishio-choi, Yedo. Lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased 22 large sumi-ye. Woman seated by a writing table, reading a book. 23 Urushi-ye. Bando Hakozaburo as a warrior resisting the opening of a castle door. 24 Tall Beni-ye. A geisha playing upon a samisen. 25 Large Sumi-ye. A woman with a pet cat watching a man dip water from a kozyobaki. Lent by a collector. 26 Large Beni-ye. Sigawa Kikuno Hoi as Anwaran lighting her pipe at a hibachi in the hands of her kamuro, and San Ogawa Ichimatsu as a man holding an umbrella over her. 27 Undivided Beni-ye triptych. Street scene. A boy kneeling to put on a woman's geta, a man playing upon a shakuhachi, and another man carrying an umbrella. 28 Undivided triptych. 3 women carrying umbrellas. Okumura Toshinobu. Toshinobu, the son of Masanobu, was an artist of decided talent who died young. His known works, which resemble those of his father, are all urushi-ye, and were designed about 1730 to 1736. Lent by a collector. 29 Ichimura Uzaman as a dancing girl. 30 Woman dressing. 31 Sanjo Kantaroi in a female role. Tsunikawa Shijinobu, an early ukiyo artist of whom little is known. His prints are extremely rare. Lent by a collector. 32 Urushi-ye. Arashi Wakano in the role of Shida no Kotaroi. Nishimura Shijinaga, son of Shijinobu. Born in 1697 and died in 1756. An artist of ability who exercised marked influence upon the development of the school. His prints are very uneven in quality. PG 35 lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased 33 Tall hand-colored print. The actor San Ogawa Ichimatsu as a woman holding a folded letter. Lent by a collector. 34 Urushi-ye. Sigawa Kikuno Ho as a woman holding a warrior's helmet. 35 Beni-ye. Procession of the Korean ambassadors. Ishikawa Toyonobu, one of the most important of the ukiyo masters. Born in 1711, died in 1785. Pupil of Shijinaga, and probably of Masanobu, whose style he closely assimilated. Lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased 36 large Beni Ye. The actors Sigawa Kikunoho and San Ogawa Ichimatsu. Lent by Samuel Isham. 37 wide print from 3 color blocks. Women and children at the seashore. Lent by a collector. 38 tall hand-colored print. Sigawa Kikunohoi as a woman reading a letter. 39 2 sheets from a Beni Ye triptych. Musume carrying umbrellas. Lent by Hamilton Easterfield. 40 Beni Ye. Mother and son. 41 print from 3 color blocks. Boys rolling a large snowball. 42 print from 3 color blocks. Man struggling with a refractory umbrella, a woman looking on. PG 36 Tori Kiyohiro Kiyonaga. Picnic party. Pupil of Kiyomasu. His known works are exclusively Beni Ye, executed from about 1745 to about 1755. Lent by Hamilton Easterfield. 43 Beni Ye. Nakamura Hatsugorowi as Sakura Nosuke. Tori Shiro known as Kiyonobu II, all of his prints being signed Tori Kiyonobu. He was the eldest son of Kiyomasu. Worked from about 1740 to about 1755, when it is probable that his death occurred. Some of the most charming of the Beni Ye prints are from his hand. Lent by Howard Mansfield. 44 Beni Ye. Yamamoto Iwanohoi as a woman dancing by a fox trap in a rice field under a blossoming cherry tree. Tori Kiyomitsu, second son of Kiyomasu, whom he succeeded as the head of the Tori line. An artist of distinction. Was the first to add a third color block to the original two. He was born in 1735 and died in 1785. After 1765 he designed only a few prints, and appears to have designed none later than about 1768. Lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased 45 wide print from 3 color blocks. The NOI performance of Musume Doi Joiji. 46 wide print from 3 color blocks. Daimyo procession game by women and children. 47 print from 3 color blocks. Ay Hanshiroi as a woman reading a letter while seated upon a karabao. 48 Beni Ye. Scene from a drama. Ichimura Kamizoe, standing, as Wakemi Gorowi and Nakamura Tamijui Roi as Akoya. Suzuki Harunobu, the central figure in Yuki-yo and the eminent master under whose hand the art of color printing was brought to perfection in the 60s of the 18th century. He was a draftsman of extreme elegance and power, and his works have a charm that is peculiarly their own. He died on July 7, 1770, when, says Shiba Kokken in his book Kokken Kakaiki, he had hardly passed his 40th year. Lent by Samuel Isham. 49 Girl attendant in an archery gallery gathering up arrows. 1 sheet of a diptych. 50 A young woman showing a caged bird to a young man seated before her, and surreptitiously taking a love letter from him. 51 A vendor of fan mounts stopping to talk to a young woman standing in front of a shop. 52 Hashira. Woman writing a love letter. 53 Hashira. Woman holding a pet dog. 54 Burlesque scene. Girls carrying Daikoku, the genius of wealth, one of the 7 fortune beings. Lent by Howard Mansfield. 55 Girls carrying Daikoku. A later impression with different coloring. 56 An archer and 2 girls near a screen. Calendar for 1765. 57 Young woman before a torii, carrying a hammer and nails with which to perform an incantation. 58 Two young women on their way to the public bathhouse through a storm of snow and rain. 59 Two girls on a terrace near a torii, in the time of the cherry blossoming. 62 girls gathering moonflowers from a tree overhanging a wall. 61 woman reading a letter by the light of an andon, portable lamp with windscreen, which another woman is trimming. 62 geisha and a young girl standing on the bank near the rapids of the Tamagawa. 63 young women seated in a window, conversing with another young woman seated on the floor and holding a picture book. 64 young men removing snow from the geta of a young woman. 65 women lying upon the floor of a room, reading a book, and another woman standing beside her, holding a pipe. 66 young women seated on a veranda after her bath, having her back massaged by her maid. 67 young man talking to a girl through the bars of a window. 68 a burlesque apparition of Fujian. Instead of the Buddhist divinity, a young woman seated on an elephant appears on a cloud before a priest kneeling in prayer. 69 lovers walking in the snow under an umbrella. One of Harinobu's most distinguished prints. Lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. 70 the sleeping elder sister. First state. Early impression signed by the printer, Kyosen. Lent by Hamilton Easterfield. 71 the sleeping elder sister. Second state. Changes made in the blocks and coloring. Lent by a collector. 72 the sleeping elder sister. Still later impression. Coloring changed again, and the number of blocks increased from 10 to 13. Lent by Hamilton Easterfield. 73 the hole in the wall. 74 mother holding her infant son. 75 at the entrance gate. 76 mother taking her infant son from another woman and handing her a letter. 77 lovers in a palace. Lent by a collector. 78 Musume walking up a flight of steps leading to a temple. 79 lovers playing battledore and shuttlecock, the young man climbing a ladder to disengage the shuttlecock caught upon the branch of a mum tree. 80 Hashiraya. Woman in night attire standing by her bedside reading a letter. Shiba Koken, an artist who is best known as a clever imitator of his master, Harunobu, whose signature he forged upon a number of prints. He also used the Goi, or studio name, Harushige in signing prints in the Harunobu manner. In later years he painted pictures in semi-European style, and made copperplate engravings which were colored by hand. He was born in 1747 and died in 1818. Lent by Samuel Isham. 81 the courtyard of a house in the Yoshiwara. A woman reading a letter and a girl attendant standing beside her holding a tray. Signed Harunobu. Shoshikan. This is the pseudonym of an artist of distinction whose identity has not been determined. His known works are calendar prints for 1765. Lent by Samuel Isham. 82 Stout lady crossing a room in a palace supported by two attendants. The use of gold leaf is notable. PG 40 Kentao Shigemasa, one of the noted artists of the school, was famous for his skill as a calligrapher, being reputed to have no superior in his day in either of the three capitals, Yedo, Kyoto, or Osaka. His prints, which are rare, are generally of much distinction. He was born in 1740, and died in the second month of Bunsei 3, February or March, 1820. Lent by Howard Mansfield. 83 Children's puppet show. Lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. 84 Benny Ye. Sigawa Kikonohoi and Ichimura Ozaman as Izumo no Okuni and Nagaya Sansa, 2 Komuzo, playing upon shakuhachi. Lent by a collector. 85 2 Geishas. Isotaker Yosai, the most important pupil of Harunobu, whose style he followed closely in his early works. Later he developed a manner of his own. As a designer of pillar prints and of prints of birds, he was especially successful. He was a samurai and associated with samurai of the superior class. The director of the mint was one of his most intimate friends and patrons. About 1781 he gave up print designing, devoted himself to painting, and was given the honorary title of Hokia. The dates of his birth and death are not known. Lent by Samuel Isham. 86 Hashiraya. Musume leaping from the balcony of Kiyomidzu Temple with an umbrella as a parachute. 87 Woman standing on the ingawa of a house, admiring snow-laden bamboo branches, back of her, a girl and a young boy looking through a window. 88 A Yoshiwara beauty arranging flowers, 2 girl attendants looking on. Lent by a collector. 89 Hashiraya. Musume carrying her infant brother. 90 Hashiraya. Young woman poling a boat in a lily pond. Lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. 91 A Yoshiwara beauty on parade, attended by a girl and a boy. 92 Hashiraya. The Baijin Juroij Inn. A young woman is represented in place of the long-life being whose attributes are a crane and a tortoise. Katsukawa Shuncho, a contemporary of Harunobu and one of the greatest of the ukiyo artists. He was highly renowned in his day and had many pupils who became famous. Most of his prints were portraits of actors in character. He was born in 1726 and died on January 22, 1793. Lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. 93 Sigawa Kikonoho as a woman holding a red fan. 94 Two actors in character. The seated figure is Danjui Roi, the leading star of the Yedo stage. Lent by Samuel Isham. 95 Actor in a female role. Lent by Howard Mansfield. 96 Iwai Hanshiroi as a woman standing and holding a fan behind her. 97 Yamashita Kinsaku in a female role. 98 Actor of the Ichikawa line in the role of Shibaraku at the Ichimura Theater. 99 Oitani Hiroji as an Amazake vendor. 100 Hashiraya. Nobleman carrying a court lady on his back. Probably a parody upon the suicide of Ahan and Choya-Eman. 101 Wide Hashiraya. The Woman in Red. Ipatsusai Bunkoi, an artist of samurai rank who, for a few years, designed actor prints in the manner of shuncho, which have great distinction of style and color. He was celebrated also as a writer of comic odes. He died on May 18, 1796. Lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. Bunko. Actor as woman talking to men. 102 Bando Hakozabero as a woman of the Yoshiwara talking to a group of men through the mice. 103 Nakamura Tamijui Roi as Jozan no Miya. Kiyonaga. Man and two women approaching temple. Lent by Samuel Isham. 104 A Yoshiwara beauty accompanied by her kamuro, girl attendant, bearing a cage of fireflies. Lent by Howard Mansfield. 105 Ichikawa Korizoi as a man carrying an actor's dressing case. Lent by Hamilton Easterfield. 106 Scene from a drama. Yamashita Kinsaku as a woman holding a roll of paper, conversing with Ichikawa Komizoe, who holds a letter in his hand. Katsukawa Shunkoi, pupil of Shuncho and generally regarded as his most talented follower. His career as a print designer was cut short by a stroke of paralysis when he was in his 45th or 46th year, but he lived for about 40 years thereafter as a recluse at Zenfukyuji Temple, Azabu, Yedo, where he died in 1827. Lent by Samuel Isham. 107 Iwai Han's hero in a female role. 108 The actor Ichikawa Monasuke. 109 Nakamura Tamijui Roi as a Tsuizumi player. Lent by Howard Mansfield. 110 Arashi Tatsuzo as a woman flower vendor. Katsukawa Shinyai pupil of Shunshoi and an artist of ability. At first, for a short time, he called himself Shunshoi. He was born in 1767, and died on December 13, 1819. Lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. 111 Abidjan. Lent by Howard Mansfield. 112 Ichikawa Monosuke in a female role. Lent by Samuel Isham. 113 Scene from the 10th act of Chushingura. 114 Ichikawa Komizoe. Yutagawa Toyoharu pupil of Toyonobu. As a painter his reputation is justly high. He did not design many prints. He was born in 1735 and died on March 3, 1814. Lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. 114 Cock, Hen and Chickens. PG 44 Toriki Yonaga. Everything considered, the greatest artist of the Ukiyo school and the culminating figure in its forward movement. He was born in 1742 and died in 1815. His finest prints were designed between 1780 and 1790. Lent by Samuel Isham. 116 The Writing Lesson. 117 Fair Travelers Resting on a Bench by the Roadside. Lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. 118 Two Geishas Entertaining a Young Man. 119 Court Ladies on the Ingawa of a Palace. Lent by Howard Mansfield. 123 Girls Going to the Baths at the Hot Springs near Miyanoshita. 121 Man and 2 Women Masquerading in Komuzoi attire. 122 Group of 3 Women and a Boy. 123 2 Women standing beside a seated geisha who is playing on a samisen. 124 Yoshiwara Beauty attended by 2 women, Shinzo, and 2 girls, Kamuro. 125 2 young women and a servant on the balcony of an inn. 126 Family group on their way to a temple for the naming ceremony of the boy who is carried on the shoulders of an attendant. 127 An actor and 2 women examining utensils for the tea ceremony. 128 Women and children promenading in summer costume. 129 Scene from a drama. 2 actors playing the game of Go with Moon Blossoms, and a third actor as a woman in the role of an umpire standing between them. 132 Young women walking under an umbrella and followed by a servant. 131 Man in a black haori approaching a temple through the snow, accompanied by 2 women. 132 Diptych. Group of women under a cherry tree. 133 Diptych. Holiday group under the cherry trees at Gotanyama. One of a series of 12 diptychs that are among Kiyonaga's finest works. 134 Boating party under Ryogoku Bridge. 2 sheets of a triptych. 135 Triptych. The Peony, Botan, Show. 136 Triptych. Women landing from a pleasure boat. Lent by a collector. 137 Hashiraya. Woman in winter costume. 138 Triptych. A picnic party under the cherry trees. 139 Group of women on the bank of the Sumida River. 140 Group of women near a temple. 141 3 women at a public bathhouse. Katsukawa Shunko pupil of Shunshoi. Followed the style of Toriki Yonaga. His works closely resemble those of the Tori master, but have less force. Worked from about 1775 to about 1795. In some of his later prints he imitated Eshi's prints in the Utamaro manner. The dates of his birth and death are not known. Lent by Samuel Isham. 142. One sheet of a triptych showing a nobleman's mansion from the garden, with the people engaged in various occupations. Lent by Howard Mansfield. 143. Women watching girls bouncing balls. 144. Diptych. Group at the entrance to a temple. 145. 3 women in a temple compound. Shunko. Women watching girls bouncing balls. PG 46. Lent by Hamilton Easterfield. 146. Group of girls at a tea booth by the seashore. Lent by a collector. 147. A picnic party. 2 sheets of a triptych. 148. Women picking wildflowers under a cherry tree in bloom. Hosoda Eshi, one of the foremost artists of the school. He was a samurai of high rank, and a pupil of Kano Eisen. For 3 years before he took to Ukiyo he held an official post in the household of the shogun Ieyaharu. Eshi was a master of all the resources of the art of color printing, and his prints are characterized by great elegance and refinement. He worked from about 1782 to 1800, when he gave up print designing. He died in 1829. Lent by Samuel Isham. 149. Triptych. 8 women and a man playing the game of Catch the Fox. 150. Group of Yoshiwara women and attendants. 151. Sumyama and her Kamuro playing with a pet dog. 152. Yoshiwara women admiring a branch of mum tree with unopened flower buds. 153. Triptych. Fate in a nobleman's palace. Ladies composing poems. Eshi. Fate in a nobleman's palace. Lent by Mrs. William Benjamin Wood. 154. Another copy of the foregoing triptych. Shows how beautifully the purple changes by chemical decomposition. Lent by Howard Mansfield. 155. Warren and attendants on parade. Lent by a collector. 156. A Yoshiwara beauty. Ink proof of the key block. 157. 2 women entering a room in the palace of Prince Genji, where a young girl is seated playing with a kitten. Yashosai Choki, an artist of ability, though not quite of the first rank. His prints are rare. He worked at first in the style of Kiyonaga. Later he imitated Yudamuro, and changed his goi, or studio name, to Momo Kawashiko. Lent by a collector. 158. Woman and child catching fireflies. Toshosai Shariku. This artist was by profession a performer of the stately and aristocratic no dramas in the service of Hakisuka, daimyo of Awa. During the period from about 1790 to 1795 he designed a small number of caricature portraits of actors, which have great force and distinguished character. Lent by Yamanaka and Company. 159. The actor Seven Tanimura Torazoi in the role of Keikagawa Hanzoi. 160. Ichikawa Ebazoi in the role of Keo no Morineo. This print bears an inscription, probably contemporary, giving the date 1794. 161. One-o Matsusuk as one of the loyal Ronin. 162. Rando Hakozabaroi in the role of Uranishuk. 163. Iwai Hanshiroi in the role of Oishi, wife of Uranishuk. 164. Ichikawa Monasuk as one of the loyal Ronin. 165. Morita Kenya as one of the loyal Ronin. 166. Sigawata Minajoi in the role of Keiyo Gozen, wife of Yenya. 167. Sawamura Sojui Roi in the role of Yenya Hangawan. 168. Arashi Tatsuzoi in the role of Yoichibe. 169. Sakata Hangaroi as Tenichi Boi Hotaku. 170 Sigawata Minajoy and Nakamura Manjui Roi in female roles. 171 Nakajima Yotimon and Nakamura Konozoe. 172 Ichikawa Omezoi in the role of Sugroku. 173 Matsumoto Koshiroi in the role of the Odokadate Bonzuing Kobae. This print is commonly known as the man with the pipe. 174 Matsumoto Yonsabaroi in the role of Okaru, wife of Kampai. 175 Ichikawa Yaozoi in the role of Hayano Kampai. 176 Kosagawa Tsuneoi in the role of Tonace, wife of Keikagawa Hanzoi. 177 Oitani Oneji in the role of Sadakuro. 178 San Ogawa Ichimatsu in a female role. 178 Anaka Yamatama Sabaroi in the role of Komurasaki, and Ichikawa Komazoi as her lover, Shirai Gompachi, walking with her under a huge umbrella. Sheriku. 2 actors. Lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. 179 Sigawata Minajoy. Kitagawa Yudamuro, one of the most gifted and most widely known of the ukiyo masters. Extraordinarily facile and brilliant. Born in 1753 and died in 1806. Lent by Samuel Isham. 180 Triptych. Imaginative view of a fete in a Chinese palace. It is a medley of Chinese and Japanese details intended as a take-off upon the treatment of Chinese subjects by the painters of the classic schools. 181 The Hour of the Boar, 9 to 12 p.m. One of a set illustrating the 12 hours into which the Japanese day is divided. 182 Diptych. Women in a nobleman's palace, painting Kakemono. 183 Yoshiwara Beauties on Parade. 183 AA Sheet from the Washing Day Triptych. 184 Woman helping a man attire himself in ceremonial dress. 185 Woman bending over to see a baby which another woman is nursing while seated before a mirror, arranging her hair. 186 Woman talking to a fan mount vendor. 187 Triptych. The Persimmon Gatherers. 188 Triptych. Procession of a noble lady and women attendants on their way to a temple, bearing offerings. Lent by Howard Mansfield. 189 Triptych. Shadows on the Shoji. Illustrations of 3 effects of sake, rice wine. 190 Woman arranging flowers. 191 The Kitchen. 1 sheet of a diptych. 192 A Night Excursion. One of Udamuro's most famous prints. Lent by Hamilton Easterfield. 193 Hairdresser combing a girl's hair. 194 Woman with a young boy on her back, watching 3 puppies at play. Lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. 195 Kintao Masanobu drunk with sake at a fete in a daimyo's palace. Part of a triptych. Lent by a collector. 196 Woman wearing a black zukin, and a maid bearing a lantern. 197 Woman standing on a pier, holding an umbrella, and conversing with a man seated under the canopy of a boat. 198 Woman bearing a teacup on a lacquer stand. 199 Woman raising the mosquito netting over her bed to read a letter by the light of an andon. 203 Performers in a niwaka, or burlesque theatrical procession, in the streets of the Yoshiwara. 201 Woman holding in her mouth a pokken, a musical toy of thin glass which makes a peculiar sound when air is blown through it. 202 Triptych. Boating Party. 203 Triptych. The Awabi Diverse of ISE. 204 Triptych. Women and Children on a Bridge. Udamuro. Woman with a musical toy. Yutagawa Toyokuni, a brilliant artist of high repute in his day. Some of his prints, especially the earlier ones, are of distinguished quality. He was born in 1769 and died on February 24, 1825. Lent by a Hamilton Easterfield. 205 Triptych. Street scene in the Yoshiwara. 206 Large head of an actor. Lent by Hamilton Easterfield. 207 The actor Korea. Lent by Howard Mansfield. 208 Musume raising a large umbrella. 209 Triptych. Women in a public bathhouse. Lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. 210 Triptych. The Six Tamagawa, represented by 6 women washing strips of cloth in a rapid flowing stream. Lent by a collector. 211 Woman accompanied by a maid carrying a lantern. 212 Triptych. Lady emerging from a kago, her attendants grouped about her. Toyokuni. Women in bathhouse. Katsushika Hokusai, a master of extraordinary versatility and power. Perhaps the most widely known of all the Japanese artists. He was born in 1760 and died in the spring of 1849. pg 51 213 Winter landscape. 214 Cranes on a snow-laden pine tree. 215 Iris. 216 Turtles swimming. Lent by Hamilton Easterfield. 217 Fuji-san seen beneath a wave of the sea at Kanazawa. Hokusai's famous wave. Lent by Howard Mansfield. 218 View of Fuji from Ushibori, a large boat moored in the foreground. Hokusai. Fuji from Ushibori. Lent by a collector. 219 Winter landscape. Ando Hiroshige, the last great artist of the Ukiyo school, and a consummate master of landscape art. Born in 1797 and died on October 12, 1858. Lent by Hamilton Easterfield. 220 A cold morning at Chano, on the Toikaido-i. 221 View of Fuji-san from Goyo. 222 Pine trees on the shore at Hamamatsu. 223 Flying kites at Fukuroa. 224 The fox fires at Oiji. 225 Kinri Yuzan, Asakusa, in snow. 226 The fields back of Asakusa seen from a window through which a white cat is looking out. 227 Travelers in snow at Ishiyakushi. Hiroshige. Pines at Hamamatsu. Lent by Albert Gallatin. 228 Evening rain at Azumasha. pg 53 pg 52 Lent by a collector. 229 Autumn moon over the river Tama. 230 The evening glow at Seta. 231 The crowd in Anichoi, 2nd Street, at night. At the right is the Ichimura Theater, upon which and upon the tea house across the way are tall signs advertising plays and actors. 232 Aoi and bird. 233 Pheasant and young pine trees upon a steep hillside. 234 Raftsmen on the Sumida River in a snowstorm. Lent by Howard Mansfield. 235 Shower at Choi number 236 Gyotoku, boats returning. End of the project. Gutenberg ebook. Japanese color prints and their designers. Updated editions will replace the previous one. The old editions will be renamed. Creating the works from print editions not protected by U.S. copyright law means that no one owns a United States copyright in these works, so the Foundation, and you, can copy and distribute it in the United States without permission and without paying copyright royalties. Special rules, set forth in the general terms of use part of this license, apply to copying and distributing Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works to protect the Project Gutenberg trademark concept and trademark. Project Gutenberg is a registered trademark, and may not be used if you charge for an ebook, except by following the terms of the trademark license, including paying royalties for use of the Project Gutenberg trademark. If you do not charge anything for copies of this ebook, complying with the trademark license is very easy. You may use this ebook for nearly any purpose such as creation of derivative works, reports, performances, and research. Project Gutenberg ebooks may be modified and printed and given away. You may do practically anything in the United States with ebooks not protected by U.S. copyright law. Redistribution is subject to the trademark license, especially commercial redistribution. Start, full license. The full Project Gutenberg license. Please read this before you distribute or use this work to protect the Project Gutenberg trademark mission of promoting the free distribution of electronic works. By using or distributing this work, or any other work associated in any way with the phrase Project Gutenberg, you agree to comply with all the terms of the full Project Gutenberg trademark license available with this file or online at www.gutenberg.org/license. Section 1. General Terms of Use and Redistributing Project Gutenberg Trademark Electronic Works 1.a. By reading or using any part of this Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work, you indicate that you have read, understand, agree to and accept all the terms of this license and intellectual property, trademark/copyright, agreement. If you do not agree to abide by all the terms of this agreement, you must cease using and return or destroy all copies of Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works in your possession. If you paid a fee for obtaining a copy of or access to a Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work and you do not agree to be bound by the terms of this agreement, you may obtain a refund from the person or entity to whom you paid the fee as set forth in paragraph 1.e.8. 1.b. Project Gutenberg is a registered trademark. It may only be used on or associated in any way with an electronic work by people who agree to be bound by the terms of this agreement. There are a few things that you can do with most Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works even without complying with the full terms of this agreement. See paragraph 1.c below. There are a lot of things you can do with Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works if you follow the terms of this agreement and help preserve free future access to Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works. See paragraph 1.e below. 1.c. The Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the Foundation or PGLOF, owns a compilation copyright in the collection of Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works. Nearly all the individual works in the collection are in the public domain in the United States. If an individual work is unprotected by copyright law in the United States and you are located in the United States, we do not claim a right to prevent you from copying, distributing, performing, displaying, or creating derivative works based on the work as long as all references to Project Gutenberg are removed. Of course, we hope that you will support the Project Gutenberg trademark mission of promoting free access to electronic works by freely sharing Project Gutenberg trademark works in compliance with the terms of this agreement for keeping the Project Gutenberg trademark name associated with the work. You can easily comply with the terms of this agreement by keeping this work in the same format with its attached full Project Gutenberg trademark license when you share it without charge with others. 1.d. The copyright laws of the place where you are located also govern what you can do with this work. Copyright laws in most countries are in a constant state of change. If you are outside the United States, check the laws of your country in addition to the terms of this agreement before downloading, copying, displaying, performing, distributing or creating derivative works based on this work or any other Project Gutenberg trademark work. The Foundation makes no representations concerning the copyright status of any work in any country other than the United States. 1.e unless you have removed all references to Project Gutenberg, 1.e.1. The following sentence, with active links to, or other immediate access to, the full Project Gutenberg trademark license must appear prominently whenever any copy of a Project Gutenberg trademark work, any work on which the phrase Project Gutenberg appears, or with which the phrase Project Gutenberg is associated, is accessed, displayed, performed, viewed, copied or distributed. This ebook is for the use of anyone anywhere in the United States and most other parts of the world at no cost and with almost no restrictions whatsoever. You may copy it, give it away or reuse it under the terms of the Project Gutenberg license included with this ebook or online at www.gutenberg.org. If you are not located in the United States, you will have to check the laws of the country where you are located before using this ebook. 1.e.2. If an individual Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work is derived from texts not protected by U.S. copyright law, does not contain a notice indicating that it is posted with permission of the copyright holder, the work can be copied and distributed to anyone in the United States without paying any fees or charges. If you are redistributing or providing access to a work with the phrase Project Gutenberg associated with or appearing on the work, you must comply either with the requirements of paragraphs 1.e.1 through 1.e.7 or obtain permission for the use of the work and the Project Gutenberg trademark as set forth in paragraphs 1.e.8 or 1.e.9. 1.e.3. If an individual Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work is posted with the permission of the copyright holder, your use and distribution must comply with both paragraphs 1.e.1 through 1.e.7 and any additional terms imposed by the copyright holder. Additional terms will be linked to the Project Gutenberg trademark license for all works posted with the permission of the copyright holder found at the beginning of this work. 1.e.4. Do not unlink or detach or remove the full Project Gutenberg trademark license terms from this work, or any files containing a part of this work or any other work associated with Project Gutenberg trademark. 1.e.5. Do not copy, display, perform, distribute or redistribute this electronic work, or any part of this electronic work, without prominently displaying the sentence set forth in paragraph 1.e.1 with active links or immediate access to the full terms of the Project Gutenberg trademark license. 1.e.6. You may convert to and distribute this work in any binary, compressed, marked up, non-proprietary or proprietary form, including any word processing or hypertext form. However, if you provide access to or distribute copies of a Project Gutenberg trademark work in a format other than plain vanilla ASCII or other format used in the official version posted on the official Project Gutenberg trademark website, www.gutenberg.org, you must, at no additional cost, fee, or expense to the user, provide a copy, a means of exporting a copy, or a means of obtaining a copy upon request, of the work in its original plain vanilla ASCII or other form. Any alternate format must include the full Project Gutenberg trademark license as specified in paragraph 1.e.1. 1.e.7. Do not charge a fee for access to, viewing, displaying, performing, copying or distributing any Project Gutenberg trademark works unless you comply with paragraph 1.e.8 or 1.e.9. 1.e.8. You may charge a reasonable fee for copies of or providing access to or distributing Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works provided that, you pay a royalty fee of 20% of the gross profits you derive from the use of Project Gutenberg trademark works calculated using the method you already use to calculate your applicable taxes. The fee is owed to the owner of the Project Gutenberg trademark, but he has agreed to donate royalties under this paragraph to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. Royalty payments must be paid within 60 days following each date on which you prepare, or are legally required to prepare, your periodic tax returns. Royalty payments should be clearly marked as such and sent to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation at the address specified in Section 4, Information about donations to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. You provide a full refund of any money paid by a user who notifies you in writing, or by email, within 30 days of receipt that he does not agree to the terms of the full Project Gutenberg trademark license. You must require such a user to return or destroy all copies of the works possessed in a physical medium and discontinue all use of and all access to other copies of Project Gutenberg trademark works. You provide, in accordance with paragraph 1.f.3, a full refund of any money paid for a work or a replacement copy, if a defect in the electronic work is discovered and reported to you within 90 days of receipt of the work. You comply with all other terms of this agreement for free distribution of Project Gutenberg trademark works. 1.e.9. If you wish to charge a fee or distribute a Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work or group of works on different terms than are set forth in this agreement, you must obtain permission in writing from the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the manager of the Project Gutenberg trademark. Contact the Foundation as set forth in Section 3 below. 1.f1.f.1. Project Gutenberg volunteers and employees expend considerable effort to identify, do copyright research on, transcribe and proofread works not protected by U.S. copyright law in creating the Project Gutenberg trademark collection. Despite these efforts, Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works, and the medium on which they may be stored, may contain defects, such as, but not limited to, incomplete, inaccurate or corrupt data, transcription errors, a copyright or other intellectual property infringement, a defective or damaged disk or other medium, a computer virus, or computer codes that damage or cannot be read by your equipment. 1.f.2. Limited warranty, disclaimer of damages, except for the right of replacement or refund described in paragraph 1.f.3, the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the owner of the Project Gutenberg trademark, and any other party distributing a Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work under this agreement, disclaim all liability to you for damages, costs, and expenses, including legal fees. You agree that you have no remedies for negligence, strict liability, breach of warranty or breach of contract except those provided in paragraph 1.f.3. You agree that the Foundation, the trademark owner, and any distributor under this agreement will not be liable to you for actual, direct, indirect, consequential, punitive, or incidental damages even if you give notice of the possibility of such damage. 1.f.3. Limited right of replacement or refund. If you discover a defect in this electronic work within 90 days of receiving it, you can receive a refund of the money, if any, you paid for it by sending a written explanation to the person you received the work from. If you received the work on a physical medium, you must return the medium with your written explanation. The person or entity that provided you with the defective work may elect to provide a replacement copy in lieu of a refund. If you received the work electronically, the person or entity providing it to you may choose to give you a second opportunity to receive the work electronically in lieu of a refund. If the second copy is also defective, you may demand a refund in writing without further opportunities to fix the problem. 1.f.4. Except for the limited right of replacement or refund set forth in paragraph 1.f.3, this work is provided to you as is, with no other warranties of any kind, express or implied, including but not limited to warranties of merchantability or fitness for any purpose. 1.f.5. Some states do not allow disclaimers of certain implied warranties or the exclusion or limitation of certain types of damages. If any disclaimer or limitation set forth in this agreement violates the law of the state applicable to this agreement, the agreement shall be interpreted to make the maximum disclaimer or limitation permitted by the applicable state law. The invalidity or unenforceability of any provision of this agreement shall not void the remaining provisions. 1.f.6 Indemnity. You agree to indemnify and hold the foundation, the trademark owner, any agent or employee of the foundation, anyone providing copies of Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works in accordance with this agreement, and any volunteers associated with the production, promotion, and distribution of Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works, harmless from all liability, costs, and expenses, including legal fees, that arise directly or indirectly from any of the following which you do or cause to occur. A. Distribution of this or any Project Gutenberg trademark work. B. Alteration, modification, or additions or deletions to any Project Gutenberg trademark work, and C. Any defect you cause. Section 2. Information about the mission of Project Gutenberg trademark. Project Gutenberg trademark is synonymous with the free distribution of electronic works in formats readable by the widest variety of computers, including obsolete, old, middle-aged, and new computers. It exists because of the efforts of hundreds of volunteers and donations from people in all walks of life. Volunteers and financial support to provide volunteers with the assistance they need are critical to reaching Project Gutenberg trademark's goals and ensuring that the Project Gutenberg trademark collection will remain freely available for generations to come. In 2001, the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation was created to provide a secure and permanent future for Project Gutenberg trademark and future generations. To learn more about the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation and how your efforts and donations can help, see sections 3 and 4 and the Foundation information page at www.gutenberg.org. Section 3. Information about the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. The Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation is a non-profit 501(c)(3) educational corporation organized under the laws of the state of Mississippi and granted tax-exempt status by the Internal Revenue Service. The foundation's IN or federal tax identification number is 64-6221541. Contributions to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation are tax-deductible to the full extent permitted by U.S. federal laws and your state's laws. The Foundation's business office is located at 809 North 1500 West, Salt Lake City, Utah 841-16801-596-1887. Email contact links and up-to-date contact information can be found at the Foundation's website and official page at www.gutenberg.org/contact. Section 4. Information about donations to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. Project Gutenberg trademark depends upon and cannot survive without widespread public support and donations to carry out its mission of increasing the number of public domain and licensed works that can be freely distributed in machine-readable form accessible by the widest array of equipment, including outdated equipment. Many small donations, $1 to $5,000, are particularly important to maintaining tax-exempt status with the IRS. The Foundation is committed to complying with the laws regulating charities and charitable donations in all 50 states of the United States. Compliance requirements are not uniform and it takes a considerable effort, much paperwork, and many fees to meet and keep up with these requirements. We do not solicit donations in locations where we have not received written confirmation of compliance. To send donations or determine the status of compliance for any particular state, visit www.gutenberg.org/donate. While we cannot and do not solicit contributions from states where we have not met the solicitation requirements, We know of no prohibition against accepting unsolicited donations from donors in such states who approach us with offers to donate. International donations are gratefully accepted, but we cannot make any statements concerning tax treatment of donations received from outside the United States. U.S. laws alone swamp our small staff. Please check the Project Gutenberg web pages for current donation methods and addresses. Donations are accepted in a number of other ways, including checks, online payments, and credit card donations. To donate, please visit www.gutenberg.org/donate. Section 5. General information about Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works. Professor Michael S. Hart was the originator of the Project Gutenberg trademark concept of a library of electronic works that could be freely shared with anyone. For 40 years, he produced and distributed Project Gutenberg trademark ebooks with only a loose network of volunteer support. Project Gutenberg trademark ebooks are often created from several printed editions, all of which are confirmed as not protected by copyright in the U.S. unless a copyright notice is included. Thus, we do not necessarily keep ebooks in compliance with any particular paper edition. Most people start at our website, which has the main PG search facility, www.gutenberg.org. This website includes information about Project Gutenberg trademark, including how to make donations to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, how to help produce our new ebooks, and how to subscribe to our email newsletter to hear about new ebooks. Contents: illustrations, Japanese color prints and their designers, catalog of a lone collection of Japanese color prints, the Japan Society of New York, 5th Avenue Building. April 19 to May 19, 1911. Introduction. Catalog: Hishikawa Moronobu, lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased, lent by a collector. Toriki Yonobu, lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased, lent by Samuel Isham. Lent by Howard Mansfield. Lent by a collector. Toriki Yomasu, lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. Furuyama Moromasa, lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. Okumura Masanobu, lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased, lent by a collector. Okumura Toshinobu, lent by a collector. Tsunakawa Shijinobu, lent by a collector. Nishimura Shijinaga, lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased, lent by a collector. Ishikawa Toyonobu, lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased, lent by Samuel Isham. Lent by a collector. Lent by Hamilton Easterfield. Toriki Yohiro, lent by Hamilton Easterfield. Tori Shiro, lent by Howard Mansfield. Toriki Yomitsu, lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. Suzuki Harunobu, lent by Samuel Isham. Lent by Howard Mansfield. Lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. Lent by Hamilton Easterfield. Lent by a collector. Lent by Hamilton Easterfield. Lent by a collector. Shibukaken, lent by Samuel Isham. Shoshikan, lent by Samuel Isham. Kintao Sujemasa, lent by Howard Mansfield. Lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. Lent by a collector. Isodaker Yosai, lent by Samuel Isham. Lent by a collector. Lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. Katsukawa Shuncho, lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. Lent by Samuel Isham. Lent by Howard Mansfield. Ipatsusai Bunkoi, lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. Lent by Samuel Isham. Lent by Howard Mansfield. Lent by Hamilton Easterfield. Katsukawa Shunkoi, lent by Samuel Isham. Lent by Howard Mansfield. Katsukawa Shinyai, lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. Lent by Howard Mansfield. Lent by Samuel Isham. Yotogawa Toyoharu, lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. Toriki Yonaga, lent by Samuel Isham. Lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. Lent by Howard Mansfield. Lent by a collector. Katsukawa Shunko lent by Samuel Isham. Lent by Howard Mansfield. Lent by Hamilton Easterfield. Lent by a collector. Hosoda Eshi lent by Samuel Isham. Lent by Mrs. William Benjamin Wood. Lent by Howard Mansfield. Lent by a collector. Yoshosai Choki lent by a collector. Toshosai Shiraku lent by Yamanaka and Company. Lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. Kitagawa Yudamuro lent by Samuel Isham. Lent by Howard Mansfield. Lent by Hamilton Easterfield. Lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. Lent by a collector Yudagawa Toyokuni lent by a Hamilton Easterfield. Lent by Hamilton Easterfield. Lent by Howard Mansfield. Lent by the estate of Francis Lathrop, deceased. Lent by a collector Katsushika Hokusai lent by Hamilton Easterfield. Lent by Howard Mansfield. Lent by a collector Endo Hiroshige lent by Hamilton Easterfield. Lent by Albert Gallatin. Lent by a collector lent by Howard Mansfield. The full Project Gutenberg license.